Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy.
Here.
Alderwoman Florida.
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Davis. Alderman French. Alderman Arnowitz.
Here.
Alderman Carter.
Present.
Alderwoman Tyus. Chairman Rhodey.
Present.
5 present. We have a quorum.
We have several orders of business on the agenda today. The first is cleaning up a board bill that will clean up some notification requirements that impacted, I guess, several other bills. And this is somewhat time urgent, so we needed to have that this week as opposed to next week because I think we're dealing with the July 1 deadline on this. And Alderwoman Young, who's the lead sponsor, is not present, but perhaps Alderwoman INGRASSIA would you like to handle the bill, sure. Alderwoman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I am here today on Board Bill 81, and if it's okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ruthsetz for an explanation.
Sure.
Good morning. Each time we have a public hearing before the HUD's committee or the Neighborhood Development Committee, and there's an LCRA redevelopment plan on that agenda, the following things happen. A lot of things happen, but among the things that happen, the following things happen. First, we place a notice in the daily record at least 17 days in advance, at least 10 days in advance, noticing everyone that there's going to be a public hearing. And then we notify the NSOs of the addresses of all the properties involved, and they post the property. And third, we send a notice to the taxing districts, letting them know when the public hearing is going to happen. So if they want to come and participate in that public hearing, they can. There was a HUD's meeting on October 9th of 2013, and we know that the notice occurred in the daily record. We know that the NSOs posted, there were 5 or 6 bills involved. The property, but we can't find any evidence that we notified the taxing districts. So our attorneys are saying to correct that, we've created Board Bill 81, and it simply goes back, it reiterates those various properties that were considered on that day. We have now noticed the taxing districts that we're having this meeting today, and if they have any comments, they could come before you. And assuming I've received no written comments from them, and I don't think any of them are here, so given that, I think we will have satisfied the requirements, and once the bill's approved, then that little loop has been stitched together that we missed back in September, October of 2013.
Are there any questions of the, I guess not of the sponsor, but of Dale, or the sponsor, Alderman Kennedy?
No questions.
Alderwoman Florida?
No questions.
Vice Chair Davis is not present. Alderman French?
Yeah, I'm sorry I came in late. So which properties are these? What are we doing with these properties?
Well, they're listed in the bill. The properties are 1008 through 10 Locust Street, the Arlington Heights Phase 2 project, 1900 Pine, 1900 Market, and 800 Olive Street. And they were all on that agenda back on October 9th before the HUD's committee.
Okay.
So a couple are in Phyllis's ward, a couple are in Christina Gracia's ward, and one is was sponsored by Alderman Williamson.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Alderman Arnowitz?
No question.
Alderman Carter?
No question.
And Alderwoman Tyus is not present. So having no other questions, the chair will entertain a motion that we pass out Board Bill number 81 with a due pass recommendation.
I move that we pass out Board Bill 81 with the due pass recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy.
Aye.
Alderwoman Florida.
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Davis. Alderman French.
Aye.
Alderman Arnowitz.
Aye.
Alderman Carter.
Aye.
Alderwoman Tyus. Chairman Rhodey.
Aye.
6 aye votes, 0 no votes. Board Bill 81 comes out with a do pass recommendation.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next order of business, we have the distinct honor and pleasure of having our former colleague back with us today, and my immediate predecessor as chair of this committee, and now I always get director and commissioner confused, director of CDA, is that correct? Proper title, or executive director?
Executive director, yes.
Executive director. Before I turn this over to Fred, I just want to make a couple comments. This came about today because the alderwoman from the second ward had emailed me and was concerned about, she had actually attended one of the meetings, outreach meetings, and was concerned about the light turnout in her portion of the city. And so I thought it was a good idea to perhaps have a briefing for all of us on the process and kind of where we're at. By way of background, I don't think I have to explain to anybody. We had a kind of a tumultuous time last year getting the CDA budget approved. We had HUD kind of come in, federal government come in and tell us that they weren't happy with the way that we were spending their money, and so they began kind of staging, for lack of a better term, somewhat of a takeover on how we should appropriate this, and that's probably not a good term. That you don't want to be describing your benefactor as taking over the operation, but it certainly diminished some of the options that our flexibility that we had previously. One of the outcomes of that has been that the interest on their part that we began more strategically leveraging our block grant funds to invest in areas where we could get the most development for the least amount of money, and that had led to the creation of the market value analysis. If I could, I mean, just if you could, because I want us all to start on the same page on this, because this is really going to be contentious. It has the potential of being contentious some months from now, and when CDA comes over here with a board bill, and the board bill isn't, we can't do what we used to do in the past, and we're all going to get mad at each other because we don't have the result that we'd like to have, we're all going to end up, at least trying to understand that we've had, what's going on, and that this isn't necessarily CDA's decision. This decision was a decision that's being kind of pushed on them by the federal government, and we have to make lemon out of lemonades. And some of us, I think, might feel that this is actually a good thing, but some of us who aren't happy about it, we want you all to understand that this isn't something that is cooked up locally. This is something that's getting thrust upon us from the federal level. So before this becomes codified and gets too far along, I thought it was really appropriate, and I appreciate Fred and CDA coming over and spending us a little time on updating us. And Fred said he has about a 20-minute presentation that he wants to walk through, and then after that we can go ahead and begin asking questions, if that's okay with everyone. We'll follow that format. Take it away, Mr. Executive Director.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. I want to thank the chairman for inviting us to this meeting, and I think it's important that one thing that wasn't done last year that we are doing this year is attempting to engage the Board of Aldermen at an earlier time, before there's a board bill, before there's a committee hearing, and we think it'll be, if you all know what's going on and when we're doing it, I think it'll be helpful to the final process. I'd like to introduce our consulting team for the Consolidated Plan. And from our staff, it's at CDA, Director of Administration, is Alana Green. From H3 Studio is Brian Robinson and Eleanor Tutt. Stephen Acree, Executive Director of RISE, which is formerly RHCDA. And Jessica Perkins, Partner at Vector Communications. What we're doing this year, the 5-year Consolidated Plan, is nothing new. It's required by HUD. What is new is the level of public engagement that we've been working on since early May. This process started in February when we did an RFP to hire a consultant. We had 6 proposals from across the country. 3 of them were very good, 2 of them were excellent, and we hired H3 Studio, Rise, and Vector as a team. We've been working with them now for 3 months. We're happy to have them on board. They're an excellent professional group of individuals and companies, and we look forward to working with them over the summer and getting a final draft plan on September 2nd. As I said, this process started in February. It'll end when the Board of Aldermen passes a bill, late October, early November. The mayor signs it, and we submit the package to HUD for their final approval. In between, we've got, as I said, a lengthy public engagement process. We had 5 geographic-based focus group meetings in early May. We had 4 public meetings also in May. We've got 3 theme-based focus groups later in June. We've got 3 public hearings scheduled and 3 30-day comment periods. So, you know, it's, again, an extensive public engagement. That's what HUD wants. That's what we're providing. In addition, when the public engagement portion is the core of it is going to be completed by the end of June. Thereafter, over July and August, there's going to be data collection, review, analysis, needs assessment, and integrating market value analysis into that component. One of the things I'm going to leave in your inboxes today, 2 things actually. One is a schedule, complete schedule of the Consolidated Plan process, when it'll be, when each component will be completed and begun, and also the RFP, the request for a proposal for the non-housing funding. You know, that's the funding component that includes the community-based development organizations, the you know, the various social services that we fund, and that will be, that RFP will go out July 1. We're going to leave it with you all. We want you to comment on it. We want you to send us any thoughts that you all have on it. We're going to, we'd like to get all those by the 25th of June so that we can incorporate them, if possible, into the RFP. I'd like to introduce our first presenter today. That is Brian Robinson, who is a principal at H3 Studio.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for having me here, and thank you, our respective firms. I appreciate the glowing words, Fred. Here's a little bit of a summary of kind of what we wanted to show you today. We're happy to kind of give you all an update, and appreciate you all having us here. What we're going to do very quickly is we're going to give you sort of, Jessica Perkins with Vector Communications is going to give you a summary of the engagement to date that we've had, give you a little more detail on that. And then Stephen and his team are kind of give you sort of an overview of the direction that the Consolidated Plan has been going, and what some of the elements of that are. But really quickly, just to maybe sort of highlight a few things, the Consolidated Plan is really, the plan is structured in order to allocate funding from 4 basic federal funding programs that Stephen's going to get into a little bit more detail about. But all of those programs are structured in and around both the Mayor Sustainability, the City of St. Louis Sustainability Plan, and the Mayor Sustainability Action Agenda, sort of all generally to build toward a more sustainable future. And maybe to sort of just highlight overall the public engagement process. We started off initially, we're sort of right here at the moment at the sort of a draft strategic plan. We initially started with 5 focus groups that were placed throughout the city where we essentially met with the CUBDOs and the various groups that are administering these federal programs throughout the city. And from that input, we developed a set of priorities and activities that would be completed. And we took those back out to the public in a series of 4 geographically based meetings and took feedback from that. From that feedback, we've completed this draft consolidated plan, which again, Stephen's going to go into a little bit more detail today regarding that. With that, I'll go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Perkins with Vector Communications, who's going to give you a bit of a summary on the engagement process to date. Thank you very much.
Very quickly, as Brian stated, we started off with the organizational focus groups, and there were 5 of those. And then we took that information and then we actually went into public meetings. Before I talk about the results of the public meetings, one of the things I want to make sure you are aware of is how we did the outreach. Basically what we did was, number one, we engaged over 100 organizations that actually receive funding from the CDB grant or the home care. All of those, we sent them a flyer that had all 4 of the locations. So we sent it as a PDF. We also offered to anyone if they wanted packets of 100 or 200 so that they could disperse them to their constituency base. We offered that to them as well. And last but not least, for the public meetings, we ran a 1/4 page ad in the St. Louis American 2 weeks in a row. And it was actually 1 week it was in the business section, the second week it was in the major section. So that is the outreach that we did. We relied on some door-to-door with the organizations, plus we did the advertising. And of course, we also provided flyers to the, thank you. We provided flyers to the, I can be really loud. We provided flyers to the Board of Aldermen from a PDF standpoint, and also delivered, I think, 200 copies of the flyer to Lewis Reeds for dispersion. So that gives you an idea of the outreach. By attendance, we basically had at each public meeting somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 33 people. While you may say that the quantity was low, I would tell you the quality was actually pretty great. And how I define quality is when you actually look at all 4 focus groups, regardless of the number of 25 to 33, the results were very common across all of the public meetings. So in other words, when we asked them what were their major priorities, a little difference there, but most of them responded in the same way. When we asked them the actions that they wanted the city of St. Louis to take to address those priorities, again, very common across all 4 public meetings. The top 3 priorities, as you see there, were housing quality and quantity, economic development, neighborhood improvement, and I'd like to throw in the 4th one, which was actually public services. So out of the 8 priorities, those were the top 4. And safer neighborhoods, you all can look at that. But we did 2 things. We actually did keypad polling, which we will do with you today. But after the keypad polling of approximately 5 to 7 minutes, we then went into discussions. In other words, we asked them, what's going on with respect to crime in your neighborhoods? What would you like to see? What's going on with respect to sidewalk improvements? What needs to happen? With respect to facade improvements, things of that nature. So not only did they give us the quantitative information by keypad polling, we followed that up with a discussion. So again, maybe small numbers, but mighty feedback. And I would venture to say that the individuals that did come to the meeting felt that their time was well spent. So, Stephen.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the consolidated plan itself and the purpose of the plan. And it really is, first of all, the consolidated plan is a federal regulation. There is a separate federal regulation that requires jurisdictions to follow a certain process to implement the 4 sources of funds that we're talking about. So to a large degree, the reason for HUD's intervention is that they were saying, we're really not following that federal regulation that requires jurisdictions to do certain things and to sort of encompass certain considerations. So I just want to throw that in there, that it has its own separate regulation, that is the Consolidated Plan reg. And the purpose of that is for states and local jurisdictions that receive these sources of funds, for them to assess their affordable housing and community development needs, and then to, in the market conditions, and then to sort of come up with priorities that are data-driven and place-based for how to allocate those resources. The regulation itself actually says a lot about the process that they expect you to use. It doesn't, design the whole process for you, but there are a lot of things covered there in terms of what is meant to be addressed by this process. And it's really about providing a framework for public dialogue into identifying these priorities, to align and focus the funding for those four entitlement programs. Then, as you know, this past year, as to contribute to that purpose, HUD engaged the reinvestment fund to create this market value analysis or residential market analysis. And part of that, the purpose of that was to create some of the underlying data that goes with how we determine what priorities are and how to focus resources. And so I think you've probably seen this map. And the important thing to keep in mind is, number one, the map is a snapshot in time for what existed at the time that the information was gathered for producing it, and that the factors that go into sort of the whole analysis in comparing all this, those factors are neutral in terms of being weighted and deciding what neighborhoods look like what other neighborhoods. It's just putting all those factors into the sort of mixing bowl and then separating it out into which ones are the most alike. And that's how you come up with these different areas. For purposes of the Consolidated Plan and initially the Strategic Plan, and I want to make sure that I also say the Strategic Plan that we're referring to is one element of the Consolidated Plan. It is not the Consolidated Plan. There is a Strategic Plan in the Consolidated Plan. In that Strategic Plan, it identifies 3 geographic target areas that are defined by the breakdown in the residential market analysis. And it groups them as the first 3, A, B, and C, as being one cluster called regional choice. And you could call these things anything, we just came up with names for them. The D, E, and F, so there's 9 clusters. The middle cluster as being another group, and then the third, the F, G, H, and I being the third cluster. And so in terms of starting to develop priorities and strategies, it first looks at breaking those definitions into 3 geographic clusters and saying, okay, we're going to first start by looking at what are the different responses for how we deal with the markets in those areas as they're defined in the residential market analysis. There are 4 main, I'm sorry, should have switched slides. So those are the clusters there. There are 4 main components of the planning process itself. One is a needs assessment and market analysis, so that's all based on data. It's data from the residential market analysis, but lots of other data too that is collected having to do with demographics, housing needs. We have all sorts of data about, for instance, let's say housing affordability and how much of the population in the city is overburdened with, in terms of housing costs. More than 30% of their income paid for housing, how much of the population has particular types of housing problems, how that breaks out into different population subgroups, how it impacts some areas more than others. So all of that data is part of this process. And then setting priorities and identifying those priorities, and that process is based upon this data, the public engagement process in getting feedback from the community, part of which we've completed and there's still a little more to go, and then local decision making. So there's obviously a deliberative function in local government that says this is finally what we decide are going to be the priorities. The third factor involved in the process is determining resources. We often talk about the Consolidated Plan as being the plan for using Block Grant Home, Emergency Solutions Grant, and HOPWA money. The Consolidated Plan is actually meant for you to look at that money in the context of all of the jurisdiction's resources as a whole. It's not meant to be something that's over here, and this is different money, it's a different world. It's meant to tell the jurisdiction, you have these resources, how are you going to use them in the context of all of your resources? And so that's another thing to take into consideration. You're supposed to be looking at that whole picture, and how do you weave this in so that all of the resources are being leveraged to identify and address your priorities. And then finally, setting goals based upon that, those goals are going to specifically address those priorities that you identified, and they take into account of the resources that are available and the capacity that you have to attain those goals with the resources that you have. There are some overall objectives that are meant to be addressed in this sort of prioritization and deciding how to allocate the resources. And that is, number one, obviously, there are limited public subsidy dollars, and so how do you use them to have the maximum impact? How do you get the most bang for the buck out of the money that's there? How do you leverage them with other resources? Kind of the same principle, but the concept of leveraging, they can't do everything by themselves. How do you attract private investment through using them? The idea of building from strength, so identifying wherever it is that you're using the funds in whatever context, what are you building off of to make the most out of those fundings? And that can be a lot of different things, but looking at how to build from assets. And then take into consideration that we often think about this money as housing money. Now, I know you know that it's used in a lot of different programs, but in different contexts, housing is going to be an issue, but in many other contexts, it's going to be other kinds of things that are priorities and not the housing. This is a work in progress, so these are the priority needs categories. The priority needs categories are a pre-established list in the Consolidated Plan. This is a computer-based system that you are, giving narrative, but you're also selecting things that are predetermined. So those priorities are predetermined. You're selecting from those priorities what the high priorities are and what are not. It's very tempting to say everything is, because when we look at everything, we say, all of this stuff we need. But you actually have to say some are more higher priority than others. So this is a preliminary to date look at that. So the things in bold at this point through the public engagement process have been identified as high priorities. But that will be further refined by the completion of all of the needs assessment and data analysis, and finally through the process of going through the adopting the bill and adopting the final plan. So that's where we are to date on the process and what the Consolidated Plan is starting to look like. What we're going to do next is we're going to show you sort of an exercise of the keypad polling process, and for you to participate in that process of how to sort of select like we did in some of these meetings. And Jessica's going to take you through that.
Are we switching over? You want to entertain any quick questions?
Yeah, I can. Sure.
I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'm going to,
Might want to hold them then if we can.
I'll hold that and give, we'll start kind of working through our list here and provide some opportunities for others. Alderman Kennedy, did you have any questions? I'm afraid we're going to try to sandwich this in and we're not going to get very far, but certainly we'll go ahead and if, we will come back if.
I'm fine to come back.
Okay.
If you want.
Well, why don't you go ahead and begin, what I was going to say is you can begin asking questions if they're ready to set up, and we interrupt your question flow, we will come back and provide you an opportunity to finish asking questions. So,
Okay. So it is presently, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's presently the stage where you're drafting the goals and objectives. Is that what I understand correctly?
It is. And so what, the needs assessment and needs analysis is not complete. So you really can't complete final priorities and goals without having that done. So
We're going to provide everybody, anybody
we're
who's
in the
here,
middle of the process.
We'll have an opportunity.
Okay. So this particular document, which the section that talks about goals is just showing a sample of what it would look like. Okay, okay. These are not the specifics, just a sample of what it would look like. Okay.
There's a lot that is going to have to, that's going to have to be done before we get to the final product.
Okay, and then that draft comes over here in ordinance form.
Yep.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's what I have for right now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman.
All right, so we are ready to begin. One of the things that we always do up front is do a test question.
Excuse me, Jessica, if I could just make one announcement while in this gap here. I just had a question from one of our colleagues about aldermen not on the committee being able to ask questions. We're going to go ahead and give the aldermen on the committee first, and then we'll provide aldermen off the committee the opportunity to ask questions. And I plan to stay here pretty much as long as it takes for all of us to kind of get through this. I want everybody to feel like they've had an opportunity to get through this. Although I have to admit, we have a Neighborhood Business Association luncheon that I'm expected to be at today at 11:30. So about 11:25, somebody else might take over to the committee if we're still here. Hopefully we won't be, but if we are. But I did want to give everybody make everyone aware that they'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So go right ahead now, Jessica. Thank you.
And also, between Fred and I, we think, we're not certain, I have to go back and actually look at the registers, but we think that 6 or 7 alderpersons actually attended one of the 4 public meetings, so that's actually pretty valid. Long and short, we do a test question. This is for you to use the keypads and know how they work, and then also allow us to know if they are working. So very quickly, what happens is, right now it says polling was closed up in the upper right-hand corner, and if you press the keypad at this point, you will probably see a 0 with a line through it. That means that it is not working at this point because polling is not open. I'm going to open polling, and what I'm going to ask you to do is select your favorite color. I'm asking everyone to do that because that allows us to know how many keypads are being used. So I'm going to open polling, and as you see there, you have 30 seconds here to answer that.
Okay.
And if everyone will put in their favorite color, that would be great. I'm looking for 12 responses. Someone doesn't have a favorite color, they can choose I.
They have not put in your favorite color.
Okay. All right, so did someone not? Those 2 right there? Oh, the ones that were conversating? Yes, that's the ones, Jessica. Will you put me in timeout, Jessica? Well, at least we know you did. I'm looking for 12 responses on most of them, so you'll know. Let's move to the first question. So in front of you, we gave you a document that had all of the neighborhoods listed. And we're asking you, which geographical target area do you represent? So look through that list, find, you know, maybe 3 or 4 of your neighborhoods and see what target area it falls in. And then on this question, you'll select either A, B, C, D, or E. When we did this in the public meetings, we only allowed people to select one of these because, of course, they lived in one of the target areas. Polling is not open yet, but it will be. You all may cover 2 target areas, so we're gonna allow you up to 2 choices. But what I would ask of everyone is the one that is most dominant for you, select that one first. Everybody got that? All right, so I'm gonna open polling. You have 20 seconds, so select the first one. And then if you cover another area, please select that one as well. Wonderful. Yay, all 12. Thank you. All right. Good representation here. Excellent. All right, so what we did in the public meetings is that we basically had 8 areas, and we asked how well the city was actually addressing those particular areas. And so the next 8 will be all the same, except it'll change. So addressing quality housing, addressing the needs of the homeless. This is a perceptual or attitude question. And so again, we just wanted people to tell us how well they felt the city was addressing these. So we're gonna run you through these 8. These are short, meaning you only have 20 seconds to answer them because you're only selecting one thing. And polling is open. How well is the city addressing job creation? Polling is open with 20 seconds.
Understood it.
Access to food.
Come on, I'm ready.
Addressing local retail stores, in other words, putting more neighborhood or local retail stores in some of the neighborhoods. Accessing greater access to health care. Polling is open. Safer neighborhoods. Polling is open. know that if I see 12 responses come up before the elapsed time, I will go on and shut it down. But if we don't get up to 12 before that, I leave it open. Recreational facilities and activities. And this one actually falls under both the public facilities and the public services. And one of the things that we found with the public meetings is people kind of confuse the brick and mortar with the actual programming. So we had to continually remind them that the facility was separate from the actual activity. Improved streets and sidewalks, how well is the city addressing those infrastructure issues? Second to the last question, this one is support for our homeless population. How well are we doing in that area? Last but not least, support for youth, seniors, and disabled. And we will apologize. In my world of research, you don't normally put all the ordinances together because you may have a different feeling. But when we did the actual discussion sessions, we broke this out. So even though this may have been kind of high or low, we were able to delineate youth, seniors, and the disabled population when we had our discussions. So now we're going into actually the next 8 questions. If you recall, there are 8 priorities, and what we did with our attendees is we said, okay, we've been able to come up with possible actions that the city may take to address that level of effectiveness that you gave them. And so we're asking, we go through all 8 of them, and we say, what are the top 2 actions or top 3 actions you would like the city to take in this particular area? And so what we're going to ask you to do here, there are 8 questions. They go very quickly. We're asking you to select your top 2 actions in housing quality and quantity. Then we go through public services, economic development, all 8 of the priority areas. So let's begin and then we will be finished. We're selecting 2. Thank you. Okay. So it looks like in this case, we're looking at home repair with a tie for affordable housing and market rate for sale housing. And if I recall correctly, with the public, it was home repair, which was D, and affordable housing. Now we're going to look at addressing infrastructure. And again, you will select 2. And street and sidewalk repair, if I'm assuming, so that's 10 out of 12, so what are we looking at, 5, 6, about 70% of you And then the next one would be C, park and playground facilities. The public at large felt that improved street and pedestrian lighting was most important, with 64% responding on that, followed by 63% for street and sidewalk repair. And this is services to address our homeless population. Which two are most important to you? I'll close early. Okay, services for mental health, substance abuse, and then a tie between services for mothers and transitional to permanent housing. With respect to the public, the number one was, as you stated, services for mental health, substance abuse populations, with approximately 6 out of 10 responding to that, and transitional to permanent housing with approximately 5 out of 10 responding to that one. And so now we look at actions for addressing economic development. Polling is open. Select 2, please. I'll give 5 more seconds just in case someone didn't get both of them, and we'll close polling. Okay, so the tie, actually, okay. So the public actually came up with E, job training and placement, followed by D, attraction and retention of businesses. In both cases, it was approximately 5 out of 10, so a little different from the Aldermanic board versus the public at large. Public facilities, again, this is the bricks and mortar. And so you will select 2 actions. Okay, so we have a tie between A and E, which is recreational centers and early childhood education centers. This is exactly on point with what the public stated. The public gave early childhood education centers, at least 60% of them selected that as one of their choices, and approximately 47% selected recreation and community centers. Now we go to non-homeless special needs. And again, you're selecting 2. I'll close early. Okay, financial services, community banking, credit union is your top choice, followed by senior citizen services. The public at large, 60% of them selected offender reentry services, and then there was a tie with financial services and senior citizen services at 40%. The neighborhood improvement, this is a little bit different, as well as the last one. We're asking you to select 3 actions instead of 2. You get 3 because you have more choices. And polling is open. I'll close at 10 seconds remaining, just in case someone needs additional time. Okay, so your top is building code enforcement, followed by demolition of derelict buildings with a building facade improvements. For the public at large, demolition of derelict buildings was number 1. Building code enforcement was number 2. Number 3 was neighborhood cleanup. And it's 60% for demolition of derelict buildings and approximately 45% for the other 2, building code enforcement and neighborhood cleanup. So a little different here. And the last one is public services. So again, if you think about the public facilities as the brick and mortar, the infrastructure piece of it, and then this is actually the services, and you are selecting 3 here, and you may begin. I'll close at 10 seconds. Okay, crime prevention, so basically 100% of you mentioned that one, followed by youth services with a 10 out of 12. And you are exactly on point with the public. Public was 84% for crime prevention, followed by youth services at almost 54%. One of the things that we will be doing, and the reason why we asked about your target area, is what we want to be able to do is go back and look at how you responded as leaders in those target areas to the perceptions of the individuals that you represent. So we will go back and compare that information. But just as I can see here, in most cases, I would venture to say it's probably an 80% comparison where you're on target with what the public stated about their particular target areas. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Turn it over to Stephen and Brian to address any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Jessica. That gives you, I think, a flavor of what what's been done thus far at the geographic focus groups as well as the public meetings. So we'd be glad to try to answer any questions that you folks may have.
And I apologize. I think I got an email yesterday afternoon, and I planned on reading through this. I guess this was in the email that somebody sent
Yes.
me an email. Was
Yes.
this it? I
Yes.
apologize. I was hoping to get around to reading it last night, and I got in late, so I didn't get a chance to do it.
I would add that along with the draft strategic plan, we have emailed all of the aldermen each of the 4 public meetings, the results of those. Now, we just gave you a hard copy of the summary of those results, but the individual meetings are available on your through email. I'm a city employee now, an appointment of the mayor. His a sustainability plan is very important. I'm trying to not to kill any additional trees, and that's why we're trying to do most of it by email.
Thank you, Mr. Director. So I'm sorry, I guess I haven't had a chance to particularly digest this, but I presume what would happen is that we would have a strategic plan that I guess we would outline what our goals are, would have strategic plans, and then we would actually go through and talk about specific tactics for each of those then? Is that and is that, I don't want to stop the meeting and read this now, but is that how this is in turn laid out then, Steve?
We've given you sort of the normal person readable version of this as opposed to the computer-based system that HUD has that if you print it out is not very helpful. So we've tried to translate what goes into that computer-based system into a sort of more readable format for you. And yeah, so what it is the Consolidated Plan has a 5-year strategic plan, and it lays out the priorities and objectives under that strategic plan. And then every year there is an annual plan. So the first one, 2015, and then each year when they come back, they'll be presenting you with the next year annual plan, which is basically the bill for that year. And that annual plan is then all the projects and programs that are meant to address the objectives in that strategic plan.
So and again, I guess I don't want to stop the meeting right now. I guess I should have probably read this last night, and I apologize. But if I were to say, we're not on the implementation side of this thing. That's what CDA is. But we're on the policy side of it, which would mean that we would be, I guess, ratifying or endorsing or recommending what your priorities were, the strategy that you were going to use to do it, and the specific tactics that you're going to use. Is that correct? Is that contained in this, or are you at the point where you can say this is kind of
Not yet.
Okay.
So what you're really adopting, when you get the Consolidated Plan, what you're really adopting is the overall strategic plan, which is saying these are going to be the objectives, these are going to be the priorities, and how those priorities are sort of targeted differently depending upon what kind of area it is. And then each year, the implementation of that is the annual plan that spends the money. And it spends that money, it allocates those resources in accordance with those priorities and objectives.
And so do you have a list of what you think the priorities are going to be for the next 5 years then? Is, for example, affordable housing going to be a priority over the next 5 years?
I would imagine it is, because there's, let's take the largest program, well, the largest two programs, block grant and home. Community Development Block Grant, there are only 2 national objectives that can be addressed by that program. There's only 2 things that programs can address. It either has to benefit low to moderate income people, which is up to 80% of the median income, or it has to eliminate slum and blight. And 70% of the funds have to benefit low to moderate income people. So it's almost inevitable that affordable housing would be a priority, plus the data would also support that, plus the public engagement also supports that. So, we haven't gotten there yet, but I would say that would be most likely a priority in the plan, affordable housing. But as I said before, those priorities that we have so far are what came from the public engagement input in terms of prioritization. That will still change with the completion of the data assessment and the input from the committee and decisions made at CDA.
And I've asked this question any number of times, and Fred's been with me when we were actually over at a HUD meeting, and I'd like to pose it to you because I, in my mind, haven't gotten a really satisfactory answer. When you go ahead and spend money, eliminating slum and blight achieves different things than creating affordable housing.
Sure.
Now, sometimes...
So for instance, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sometimes when you create affordable housing, you create affordable housing in the process of removing slum and blight. In other words, you have a vacant building and you convert it to something that's affordable, and that's great. We had a fairly active discussion at our committee several weeks ago about development and the importance of market value. Right now, much of the city, the development cost is below market value, right, which means that we're upside down and we can't get the natural, organic type of development that occurs when it's right side up. If your goal is to create affordable housing, which means you're creating supply at a price below market value, then that doesn't, I have trouble understanding how that builds market value. And at some point, we want to be in an environment that a whole lot more homes will get built and developed when market value exceeds development cost.
Right.
But anytime you're going to go ahead and do affordable housing, you're in essence building stuff below. I mean, I jokingly say this, but I think there's some truth to it. If you want to do affordable housing, strip out services, and you know, really nice homes can sell for a wonderful price when it's unsafe to live there. And
Sure.
So I guess I just, you know, would like to hear your answer to that.
There's quite a few of them.
I mean, in my own ward, as an example, and Fred kind of walked us through an example of this in his area, and there are some examples of this in mine. We were 6 North Sarah, which is a beautiful project that was built at Sarah and Laclede. The developer for that wanted to build that at the corner of Euclid and Laclede. Euclid and Laclede now is home to the Park East Tower, which has, you know, has subsidy in it in the form of, you know, tax abatement, but it doesn't have real money subsidy. I insisted that that developer move on the periphery of the neighborhood, and they did, and it is very heavily subsidized. They have some of the city affordable money in it. We have some of the workforce housing tax credits from the state in it, along with tax abatement and everything else. And I think that's been a stabilizing factor on Sarah, and it's affordable rental, but it's not affordable for sale. Anyway, I still wrestle with this, and I'd like to, I guess, hear your explanation of it.
Okay, so I could go from the big picture down. The big picture is the community development block grant and home programs are not meant to be the development agenda of any jurisdiction that receives it. They have national objectives created by those federal programs. It is not the same thing as what the city's development agenda is. If the city doesn't put resources into development, that's the city's choice. Now, it may be that the city doesn't have funding to do that, but that's a prioritization that the city makes. Most cities put local funding into development. We have very little. We don't even support our development agencies with local funding, really. Right. So that's a prioritization function at the local level. It's just not what the money is there for. Number two, you can certainly do things that eliminate slum and blight by doing market rate housing. You can absolutely do that. One of the premises I would argue with is that in most of the city, affordable housing is market rate housing. The rents and prices for homes that are affordable under these programs are sometimes higher than the markets that we have in the city. So yes, it takes subsidy, but it also takes subsidy to build and rehab market rate housing in the city. So it's not an argument of that you subsidize affordable and you don't market rate. You subsidize everything, pretty much. There are very few markets in the city where that's not true. So it's really a matter of how you prioritize those things under these programs.
So what I'm hearing you say is if we adopt a document for you, a 5-year consolidated plans that says affordable housing is the priority, we're saying affordable housing is a priority for the purpose of our block grant application, but it is not necessarily the purpose of the city's overall development agenda.
Sure. That's correct.
Is that a fair?
That is
so
correct.
We could be at least honest to ourselves by saying that if we want to go ahead, and I believe that if we are ever going to turn the city around, we actually need to increase the cost of housing, to be successful, and frankly get out of subsidizing, market rate housing.
Yeah, that's where you want to get to.
And until we get there, we're never going to be able to see the type of organic redevelopment happening throughout our city until we go ahead and begin inverting that, or tipping it the way it should be.
Yep.
So I just want to make, and Steve, thank you. That was probably the best answer that I've gotten since I've asked that question. So thank you. I have some more questions, but I don't want to dominate all the time here. I'm going to go ahead and start going through the list. We'll provide Alderman Kennedy another shot at this since we kind of cut him short last
Right.
time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to be clear on what ultimately comes,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
no problem. What ultimately comes back over to the Board of Aldermen. It will be a 5-year consolidated plan with yearly increments or yearly goals identified within it. Is that what you explained?
The 5-year consolidated plan will have 5-year goals, 5-year objectives, 5-year goals, and a first year of goals with money tied to it. So the 5-year portion doesn't allocate funding. The 5-year says, for instance, if, and I want to clarify this a little bit, if affordable housing is a priority, affordable housing might be a priority for these types of areas, and it might be home repair is a higher priority in these types of areas. And, multifamily percent, that's the way priorities are really done. And so in the 5-year plan, it might say 100 units in that 5-year period. And then the annual plan will say, and then in the first year, we're going to do 10.
Right. Okay.
And this is how much money we're going to allocate to do that 10.
And then this document is just simply an example of what it'll look like. This
Yeah,
is
and
not.
it's very, very, as I said, very, very preliminary. The bill itself is a board bill that is really adopting a document that is a HUD formatted required document that doesn't look like anything like that.
So is some of the information that you got from the community engagement incorporated here?
It is. So that is really just based on the community engagement in terms of selecting those priorities. So like when you did that keypad polling,
Right.
the public engagement was like a combination of a round of focus groups and then these public meetings that did the keypad, and the focus groups did keypad polling too. And then after the keypad polling, group discussion. And so that is so far what those priorities have.
So goals and objectives are listed in here? Goals are?
Right now, it really just has the priorities. There aren't any real goal setting
Okay,
there.
all right. Okay. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderwoman Florida.
Thank you. I want to thank you for sharing the process. I'm more concerned about the needs assessment, which you're in the middle of, and how you plan to, I think our neighborhoods need like a report card, actually, and how you plan to go about providing a needs assessment for the whole city.
So, because, well, when she was introduced as being from H3, but she's actually with my staff, Eleanor Tutt. And Eleanor is the person who does most of the data analysis component. So, Eleanor, you want to come up and talk about sort of like what to expect from needs assessment?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, and like with a lot of the things we've been discussing, the needs assessment has a specific meaning under the HUD regulations and the HUD Consolidated Plan, and then there's lots of things that we will probably want to look at because we do a lot of work in neighborhoods and are interested in neighborhood quality. So under the Consolidated Plan needs assessment, HUD has a series of data on housing cost burden, on the homeless needs. Lots of that data is coming from city departments, yes.
Security? I mean, food security is a part of that?
Mhm,
Okay.
yeah, right.
All right. And education, access to quality education, demographic.
Right.
Okay.
So there are those pieces. So the education and the food access pieces are pieces that we'll be looking at because we have that information and we care about those issues, those aren't the HUD required pieces of the consolidated plan. Sorry. But yeah, we'll be working with the market value analysis as well to kind of dig deeper into that information and kind of match up those public services information like education and food access, as you mentioned.
When do you plan to have the needs assessment completed?
Oh, when is our timeline? It's, I mean, I'm sure there is a precise date, but we're working on it now. So, I mean, I would say.
Well, let's see, the,
blanking on the
yeah,
precise date.
I forget, but we were going over the timeline.
Well, the draft plan is due, final draft plan is due September 2nd.
Right.
So I think we're, you know, sometime in August.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, because that sounds very promising as far as a tool in our being able to do a better job of being more impactful. And then there were like just 3 elements that I'm not hearing, and that would be energy efficiencies. And, you know, we know that most of our CO2s are emitted from our lack of energy efficient structures. And I think that that would impact low and moderate income families as well as not spending as much money on heating and cooling. So I'm not hearing about that element or transit-oriented development, kind of building density, and universal design, which I'm hearing over and over again with, from the disability community, and aging in place, which is something that we know most seniors are low and moderate income, and that aging in place is quite impactful on their quality of life as well as on the economy.
So those should be addressed at a couple of different levels. On the energy efficiency, there's actually federal requirements on the energy efficiency. So when you solicit proposals for housing development and when you do home repair, there are certain things that are expected by the federal regulations to do that, so that should be a priority. But there should also be, for instance, the things that you're mentioning about whether it's universal design or transportation-oriented development, those are things that should be considered as priorities when you, for instance, are selecting, again, let's say it's housing proposals. If that's a priority, then that should be a priorities in the process of soliciting proposals that way. You can put that into the plan, but it's really at the implementation that you do that you really want to make sure that happens. So that's the input from you that would need to come to get into that. So those are the kinds of things that people need to talk about, to say, you know, universal design is important, transportation-oriented development is important. So that's sort of the reason for the dialogue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Just so I'm clear, because we actually had a conversation about transportation several weeks ago on the telephone. If we are looking, I guess at some point we go out and prepare an RFP for non-for-profits that would then be able to provide some services. I mean, how succinct or how specific do we have to be? Can we go out and say, we're looking for somebody to help us figure out how to, you know, connect people to jobs, or
Yeah, I mean, what you're trying to achieve is that what you're asking for, if you request proposals for programs for the year, what you're trying to achieve is that everything that you're asking is something that is going to address the priorities and objectives in your annual plan. So that if you've determined that the priorities in this part of the city are these, you know, 4 types of things, then that's what you want to be asking people to give you proposals to do.
so would it be fair to say that we want to link people from north and south of the central corridor to the central corridor where the jobs and transportation are?
Certainly could. Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I interrupted. You're
I'm finished.
okay.
That was a good comment. Yeah.
Vice Chairman Davis, do you have any questions?
Thank you, yes. Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
Alderman Kennedy and I had an opportunity to just kind of go back in the past working on neighborhood plans. And I think one of the most successful ones your organization assisted us on. So it's good to see where we're going now. My main concern is dealing with real information. And we talk about affordable housing units. Are we going back and actualizing real inventory, what's really out here, what is available? Because I'm looking at empty units all over the city.
Right.
And until we can address how to get people in the ones that are already there, most especially the seniors, those buildings are not full. And then we go to some of the others that we did the mixed use in the last 5 to 7 years. So we're going to deal with that as well.
Well, the data, the data that's used, what it does is it looks at the building inventory and then how much of that is occupied inventory and how much of that occupied inventory is affordable.
Okay.
So what it does not do, and this is an important point that someone sort of alluded to earlier, is it doesn't tell you if that affordable housing is good housing or bad housing.
Ah.
Because there's plenty of affordable housing that is not good housing. And so it doesn't mean because people have it, doesn't mean you don't need it because they live in some great.
Okay. Now, what role will this market analysis that was presented to us a few months ago from this private company, what role will it play in the strategic plan? You know, it's identifying all the
So
data.
far the role is, well, it's the data that's under that analysis, but to date what it is the determination to sort of divide that up into the 3 categories as having sort of 3 different characteristics. So those, one category where the market is, functioning fine, where so you might do something else there, like, just an example, it could be that the biggest need in a market like that is that seniors need help with in maintaining their homes. Otherwise, the market's doing fine there. In another category of those 3 categories, it could be that it has the highest rate of vacancy, vacant land, vacant buildings, and so the intervention there is acquisition and new development. So that's what we're talking about in terms of the geography. It's not necessarily this part of the city, it's market type.
Okay.
And then what the appropriate strategy is for that market type.
And I think that also goes back to one of the things that we do need to address, and I don't know exactly how it fits in here because we won't necessarily be dealing with block grant funds to achieve this goal, but our public transportation also needs to be improved. We can't develop a city that has quality housing or the appropriate commercial entities or whatever if people can't get back and forth to them. And so having a north-south distributor in this town is critical at this point. And I don't know if we can put this as a
See, if that could be put in, if I can read what you're saying.
Yeah.
If that could be put into the city's plan.
Okay.
Then the comprehensive plan, or the consolidated plan could say, the city has this priority of doing this. So one of the priorities in the consolidated plan that sort of leverages off that is that we are going to support development that goes with that.
Okay.
But that component really goes with the city's responsibility of having a plan to do that.
Yeah, okay. And I guess my last thing is, I noticed that our individual thinking as representatives for our areas is very close to what our constituents are really thinking as well. So that's a good thing, that's a very good thing. But what I also noticed in that is that our past expenditures have not necessarily matched those items that were identified. And
Not close.
I know. So now we have something to work with that can mirror what is truly needed and is truly desired. If we can agree.
Yeah.
If we can
That's the
agree.
hope.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate that, and I do appreciate you because I've been around long enough to know that you know and understand, and I appreciate the work that you've done in the past to help some of us move forward.
Thank you.
I think you make a very good point, Alderwoman. We have a very nice and thoughtful and dedicated group of consultants. I think Jessica's probably involved in every outreach thing. Alana was, I just met a couple months ago, but she spent about 2 hours force-feeding me with a fire hose with information about how all the regulations from CDA, and of course Brian's done a great deal of work, and Stephen has been our CDA director and been involved in this stuff for many, many years and has given most of his life.
Never thought I'd be back in this room again talking about the Bach Grant
Happy to be
bill.
gone, and now you're back. Huh? Okay. Alderman French.
Thank you. So first, let me just say I disagree a little bit with the interpretation that was expressed earlier that that the federal government is forcing us to spend like this. I think what they did was say that that the city needs to be able to have some logic behind their spending and be able to defend it, and that previously we've been kind of, from their perspective, spending it all over the place willy-nilly. And so I think that it is good that we have some guidelines and we set some priorities on how we spend money. Now the tricky part is actually following the plan. And I think one of the things we do politically is we kind of put a whole bunch of stuff in the a whole bunch of different categories in these plans, and then that allows us the flexibility over that 5 years to spend it on what we really want to spend it on. I mean, in this thing, it doesn't say, what percentage should be spent on affordable housing in what areas versus what percentage of the total funds we get should be spent on economic development and in what areas. I think what we do is just put a lot of different categories down here, and it allows the flexibilities of administrations to kind of spend it how they want to. The relationship between this 5-year consolidated plan and the mayor's sustainability plan, can you go over that again?
Yeah, the intent is, obviously they're two different things, but the intent is to try to keep in mind the city's sustainability objectives when we talk about what we're trying to do in the consolidated plan. So it's not like the consolidated plan is going to be any kind of extension of the sustainability plan, but if the consolidated plan can incorporate priorities for like energy efficiency and transportation-oriented development, it should do those things.
So what concerns me, though, is that in the mayor's sustainability plan, Objective A, Strategy 1, is to reinforce the city's central corridor as a dynamic heart of the region. And for those of us who live in neighborhoods north and south, we've been hearing that for a long time, where most of our attention and resources spent on that central corridor, while neighborhoods north and south continue to lose population and services continue to dwindle. And so what I was really hopeful about, but still with the pessimism of a person who's been around in politics for a long time, but I was hopeful that by doing this market study here, we would be able to then again, and I say again because we do this all the time, it's not like we don't know where the need is, but we clearly see where those areas of opportunity and where those areas of great investment need are. But I worry that we still aren't going to get those resources to those neighborhoods that need it in any kind of a way that will actually make a meaningful impact if our chief strategy continues to be a central corridor. As you note wisely, there's no development in the city really that's occurring without subsidy. And so if our priority area is that central corridor, that's where most of that subsidy is going to go, even though that's not where most people live. And so my concern is about where folks live. And so how, is there anything here, I've looked through every page and I don't really see like, how we prioritize an opportunity versus transitional and regional choice areas? Is that a question for you or?
Could be, I don't know, Fred.
Could you give me a question again?
Yeah, so now that we've divided the city or at least neighborhoods and census blocks into these regional choice, transitional, and opportunity areas. Is there a plan to prioritize or prioritize certain areas?
For what?
For investment or stabilization?
For investment?
Or stabilization? What's the plan for the opportunity areas? Let me just get to the point.
Well, first of all, it's the specific plan is going to be developed in July and August, as we talked about, with the needs assessment. But I'll give you an example of there's 9 categories. Transitional are the middle 3. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that are highest priority for, let's say, real estate development. Now that would exclude, obviously, A, B, and C, the first 3 and the last 3. It doesn't mean nothing's going to, there's no possibility of funding, but it does mean that the highest priority are in the transitional areas. We just had a $2.5 million called a NOFA, RFP, if you will, for housing production. We're going to make those awards Friday, June 20th. The highest priority, there were 12 or 13 different categories that were rated, including, for instance, energy efficiency. All CDA projects are Energy Star certified. But the highest priority went to those 3 the transitional area. The awards are going to be made in, it's going to flow in the transitional area, but there's also going to be one in, let's say, opportunity area. And that's going to be the largest number of units. Matter of fact, that'll be 3 times the number of units that are in the transitional units, the transitional areas.
Okay, and so
that's an example of how the market value analysis is being used.
right, and I also think it's an example of what I was saying earlier, where this data is being used to kind of further an agenda that was already in place. And so
I don't know what agenda you're referring to, but
let me explain. And so the federal government doesn't tell us that those transitional areas are our priority. That's a decision that's made here in St. Louis, that those transitional areas are our priority. And when you look at what those areas are that are labeled transitional, I mean, the mass majority of those are south. And so you have areas around Forest Park that are considered transitional areas that will then be the priority for the city. And most of the southern neighborhoods, there are actually very few of those reddish dots. And even with this, I can't tell what's in the highest opportunity or if that's actual transitional. It's probably opportunity. So what I worry is that what happens at the local level, the politics of it all, is that we just use this data to defend a really focusing of these resources, limited resources, on the areas that aren't most in need. And we are going to allow those areas that are most in need to further slide.
that's not been the case with the first NOFA that we've done. Just the opposite. We have 3 times the number of units that are going to go into opportunity areas that are going into the rest of the city. Okay?
I see the map here, and it seems to be a cluster in south and then distributed over north.
Well, so there's a good portion of the south side that is not, that is in A, B, or C categories. Okay, they're excluded.
Yeah, the properties in the south were, it seems like clustered around this kind of.
You know, I'm telling you what's the experience. We've only had one experience with this, and that is we've had one request for funding for housing, and the result is we're getting more in the opportunity area than anywhere else in the city.
Well, that's good, and I just, I think it's something that we should pay close attention to on this committee as we move forward. So I just wanted to express to you my concerns and what
I understand it,
what I'll be
and,
looking
you know,
for.
part of the rollout of this, and the HUD, local HUD office was very plain about it. They said that there's some areas that need services more than they need housing. And they're referring to what we would describe in this document as the opportunity areas. And the idea is to make certain that we up, I would say, the services in those opportunity areas as funding permits. Don't forget, we're talking about, you know, transportation. We're talking today. He's talking about transportation, economic development, housing, and a variety of other things. We're talking really about $16 million in block grant funding.
Mm-hmm.
We can't remake, you know, this is not going to have a huge impact on crime reduction in the city. So I think we, you know,
Yet that was one of the
have to have
highest
some
priorities.
realistic.
Yet that was one of the
realism there.
highest priorities of folks in your study there. The 97 respondents, 60% of them said they want safer neighborhoods.
Yes, absolutely. It makes sense, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, that's what I hear out there.
On the other hand, the city is spending, I don't know, my guess is 180 roughly, somewhere over, certainly over 150 million dollars a year on police. We know that. We've been spending it for years. It's the number one priority, budget priority the city has had. So, you know, there's an option, taking money from other departments and putting it in the police department.
So let me just follow up on one thing you said with the, some areas need housing, some areas need services. So the priority area that you're talking about, the transitional areas, is that priority for housing?
I said the priorities are different in different areas.
So what's the
okay?
priority for the transitional areas?
As it relates to housing, that would, the transitional areas would be the number one priority.
For housing?
For housing. For housing production.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Having said that, again, in this particular NOFA we're just completing, there is number of units in the opportunity area is the largest.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman, when I think you a little bit mischaracterized what I was the point I was trying to make when I was saying the government was the federal government was trying to nudge us into spending this. I guess the point I was trying to make is, if we're going to use is actually the point that you're trying to make. If we're going to use the market value analysis as the guide for us how to spend money, we are going to be challenged with how to deal with issues of geoparity with the spending of that money. And that's going to be the biggest challenge that we have, because it's very clear on the map here that if we're going to go ahead and begin spending money in certain colors, zones on here, that's going to, you know, it's going to create, you know, an opportunity to further have schisms down here, in our opinion, and we already have a lot of disagreements. And it's if we're being nudged to do it in that way, we have to be very conscious of how to deal with that geoparity. And perhaps, Mr. Director, if you could, is there from time to time where we can create maps of where the housing is being developed with the block grant money? Is that, at this, I don't even know where we are in the
Well, there
process.
hardly has been any housing developed with block grant money in the last few years, because the money's been spent for other reasons.
Okay.
You know, other objectives. That's why HUD came in and said, you guys got to make some changes.
Okay.
We've got to get some we're giving you this money, you got to get to produce some housing.
Okay.
I'm sorry, now what was your question?
Well, I don't know where we are in the process. You have sent out an RFP.
Can we get a maps where we have put?
You've sent out an RFP at this point, and so you're going through that to figure out who's going to get the funding, is that right? Most of the requests
Yeah.
for funding have been in the opportunity areas, is that, am I phrasing what you had said correctly?
There were, we had 13 proposals.
Okay.
And there were, actually over 100 units.
That were proposed?
yes.
And then you're filtering
Only
through-
2 of the proposals were in what we would call opportunity areas.
And have
Okay.
those been funded yet?
The
or-
other 11 were in transitional areas. Those are we're going to make announcements on those Friday.
Okay.
The opportunity areas was a large development, and so it's 76 units, and that's going to kind of dwarf what's
Okay, so
being
we'll
done.
have
in
that information will be public on Friday, and we'll
Yeah.
be able to actually see where they are on the map.
Right, but if you wanted to, we can do that, map that out, but we could also go back 5 years and map out where money has been spent, or 10 years,
Well, before we gobble up a lot of staff time, if there's a request for that, we'll make it, but perhaps at least this first time out, we can at least get where the housing is actually going to be developed, if we could have that geo-plotted or...
I'd like to see that if it, I'll take you up on that offer, seeing the
Oh,
last 10
okay.
years.
Well, if there's a request on it, the committee, if it's...
For what period?
You think you suggested 10 years, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, next is Alderman Arnowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I sit and listen to this overview this morning, it just sounds like a lot of this money's really supposed to be spent on the low and moderate income areas.
Can't hear him.
It seems like I'm sorry. And it seems like I get it here, the majority feels it's been spent in other places, maybe where it shouldn't be spent on priorities. But I guess my question is, Fred, I have problem with businesses in my area with the facade money. I mean, 99% of them don't even qualify because they say it's too much of an income area. I don't understand how they draw the line on that. There's some businesses, as you know where I'm at, that I believe qualify, but they always tell me no. So I know new business at one time got a lot of facade money down there, and that's the same area where they said it doesn't qualify. There are things under the home repairs in the area that we use the money for. Was there ever or was there never like a set price for money in helping homeowners with repairs? Because some of them can get $5,000, $7,000, and some have gotten more money, $12,000, $13,000. Is there, what I'm saying? Is there a set price really they should have? Because it would go a little further, with healthy home repairs in your area.
There is a limit of $25,000. Okay. Now, once we're talking about the Healthy Home Repair Program. Once, and that is there are requirements that HUD has. Once we get in there, a building inspector goes through it, determines exactly not just what they want done, but what needs to be done according to federal requirements. So it really, frankly, it really increases these requirements really increase the cost. If somebody's getting $10,000 and somebody else is getting $25,000, that's based on what the inspectors found and what the need is.
Okay. And that's how they base it on that, more or less.
Let's see, facade improvements. Let's say you got a facade at Gravois and Bates. They draw, I believe this is accurate, they draw a 1 mile radius around there. See if that area is low, moderate, and low mod income, and if they are, the business there is eligible for facade money. And if it isn't, if it's not, then
So they base it on that 1 mile radius of the income for everyone in that area, more or less, being a resident living there also?
Yeah. You just live in a wealthy area, Alderman.
I have a 1-bedroom trailer there. I'm so lucky I'm still there. But no, I was just wondering because, I mean, I've inquired about some businesses down there and to get some facade money, do some improvements, and I mean, every time it's been no.
Where are they at? Gravois?
Yes, like across from the Schnooks there, what is that, 7,500? And I mean, I also tried the highway florist right there by Ziegenheim's, and the other one was the daycare center on Gravois.
Okay. Well, the highway florist is surrounded by cemeteries, right?
Right. So there's no income, is there?
No income, yeah. Yeah. I don't know what the problem is there.
So.
But you might check with Michelle again.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Include your questions, Alderman?
I'm done. Thank you.
Alderman Carter? Alderwoman Tyus?
Just to, Mr. Wessel, just to piggyback off Alderman Arnowitz, I had a situation, and I understand what you said, in which a lady got $12,000 for fixing her roof in my ward. Then she called and complained and said we hadn't done enough for her, till the point where she got on my last nerve, because $12,000 is a lot of money to me. And we ended up giving her another $8,000. And I was really irritated, and I called Mr. Rata, and he said basically what you said, is that, well, we got in there, and so we had to do all this money. When we used to have it as the 20th Ward, we limited $5,000 to $7,000, and we tried to help everybody. I think that's a quagmire when you give somebody $25,000. That is, we're already doing triage. So with that amount of money we have, so to give somebody that kind of money is just unfair to me, okay? So what I guess my question is, so when we have to make these decisions, couldn't we look at the long-term effect of, when we go in there and we look at a house, don't we know how much we need to spend? And maybe we don't take some of these people that take $25,000, $30,000 to fix, because it's really knocking out a lot of people who maybe just need a little help. And I would really, and just me, maybe other people feel that, I would prefer to help a lot more people. And especially this woman seemed to feel like it was her right to get the money, and she was angry that we hadn't done enough. Couldn't we kind of assess and say, well, these big amounts limit how many properties we would give that kind of money to? I guess is my question.
Yeah. First of all, I share your concern. I just as well have the 5,000. The larger amounts, we do 5,000, that's block grant money. That is a forgivable portion, okay? Then we go above 5,000 up to 25, and that is home money, that next 20,000. That requires, first of all, it requires a lien to be placed on the property. It is payable sooner or later. It might be when that individual dies or sells the property, one of the two.
If the house is still in repair and it's worth that much.
Right, right. But, this is, I would say this. First of all, we'd have to do either or. We either have to go back to that $5,000 program or do what we're doing now. And HUD likes the comprehensive healthy home program that we're doing. I just met with the CDA director at St. Louis County last week. They do just the $5,000 program that you're talking about and what we did years ago. I like that. Obviously, there's, if you do it, there's a lot of unmet needs in that home. And if we use home money, we have to address all of it. And most of the money we have available is home money. So that's why we're That's why we're in that program. What I describe it as a great program for a few people. Last year, we did 163 loans. This year, we're going to do more. But, it's just so, it is time-consuming, it's expensive, it's going to be tough to do more than 175 or 200 homes a year. But when we do those 200 homes, we're really providing a great benefit to 200 people.
And I'm not going to say all, but it seems to me, as a homeowner, and I know there are extenuating circumstances, you're responsible for your homes, okay? And so I'm not talking about seniors who spouses have passed away, but every year, all the years I've represented my community, my speech to them is that fix something on your house. Yeah. Find something and fix it. So again, I guess my question is though, because I was kind of confused a little bit because John said to me, well, is it John? Because I'm used to calling his father. It's Bill. Yeah. I'm sorry. That's an old slip. Okay. Well, then we needed some more. Don't we know comprehensively when we first start on a house how much they need? Don't we do that overview?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
So couldn't we, and doing what they said, couldn't we, even though we're doing the healthy home and we got the home money, couldn't we do some of the lesser homes and do a lot less of the big projects? Maybe do the 10,000, 5,000s, 5 to 10,000s, and do a few big projects.
Well, we do.
Okay.
We do some of what you're talking about. As a matter of fact, half of the loans are for what you're talking about. Replace a roof.
Right.
Replace a furnace. When we get a referral like that, that's a priority, and generally it's $4,000 or $5,000.
Okay, well, that was just because she just threw me for a loop. I've never had anybody be so unappreciative. Mostly the people, if they got the 5,000, they were so happy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This person called me after she got 12, and I'm like, you got 12? And then she said, I didn't wait. You haven't done anything for me. So that was hard for me to take. I'll just say that. Second question, I kept hearing us talk about the HUD regulations. Is there someone who could give me citations? If you don't have them now, if you could send it to me on the email, what HUD regulations?
24 CFR Part 91 is the consolidated.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. 24 GF, what'd you say it was?
24 Codified Regulations Part 91.
CFR 91?
91, that's
okay.
The Consolidated Plan, block grant is 570. 24 CFR 570.
And 24 CFR 570? Okay.
Home is 24 CFR 90.
And then what was the last one? 24 CFR? 90. Okay, thanks. And I had already had down the request about a map. I would just like to add, if we're going to do the 10 years, can we also have the data associated with the map, like what projects were done and the amount of money? So not just a map of where it was spent, but actually the data that goes along with it.
I'm sorry. Give me that again.
Do y'all need to finish? Okay. Alderman French had asked for the map for 10 years, and I had already had that down to ask for, and I was also asking, could we have the data associated with it, like when we do the map, what the project was, what the amount of block grant money, so just all the data that goes along with the mapping. I just don't want to see a map of where it's spent. I want to know the information also.
Maybe I'm not sure what. We'll see. I'm going to see what's
let's just say
block grant money, and the dollar figure, and the number of units.
Right. If it was units, I thought we were just going to show where the block grant money, that it wouldn't necessarily be the number of units. Let's just say, because we spent block grant money on my Snooks project. So if you would show the Snooks project, you would show that as block grant money. And this is going way back, because Vince and I spent $4 million to even get the land, okay? So that would be showed. It would show that we spent $4 million. It would show it was acquisition cost or whatever.
The map's not going to show how much money was spent. I think I can get you a document that says how much.
That's what I'm saying, not on the map, just could we have the accompanying data to go with the map, is what I'm saying. So what we're showing on the map, could we also have a statement saying, okay, this is number one on the map, and this is what it entailed? It'd be a
Yes.
spreadsheet? Okay, thank you. My other concern I have is I just think that, I guess I got 108 people showed up totally for
Yes.
all the meetings. That,
Well, wait a minute, that's for the 4 public meetings.
Right.
There were 8 to 10 on each of the geographic focus groups, and those were neighborhood leaders, like folks from community development. The Cubdo folks were there, neighborhood leaders, business people. So there were a lot more than 108 people responding. But I guess, you're suggesting the sample size is too small?
that was going to be my statement, that I thought
Yeah.
that was very small.
Well-
And so just a question, so these questions that you ask people, are they actually in writing? And would you be open to, if we took them out to our communities and asked for some more input, or would that be too tainted? So I guess or would you be open to having, I mean, I just think that 108 is just an awful small amount to represent the city of St. Louis.
Well, here, what I would suggest is, first of all, I have to ask these folks, but to me, I don't think that we would accept as part of the data information other than what the consultants collect, put it that way. When I looked at the public meeting data, number one, if you'll look at this, you all have the results from each public meeting. I was surprised at the similarity of the responses, number one. And number two, a question that I had in my mind was, if the sample size was doubled to 220, would the results be different? I doubt it very much. I mean, this was done, I think, objectively. The questions are broad, they're subjective. The responses are subjective, but I do think it gave us and should give everyone that reads it a flavor for what the public is interested in. Jessica?
Yeah. I'm going to just speak from high school and GPAs, easiest way to do it. You got 100 people who responded. Unless you get another 200 people that respond totally different, the numbers are not going to change. It's kind of like junior year, freshman year, or freshman, junior, sophomore year, you had a C average, and all of a sudden you decided to blow it out in senior year, you're still going to come out with a C average. So that's the downside of it.
I understand statistical data.
I understand,
Okay,
yes.
so, and what I'm saying is, and I also understand, because I've had lots of meetings, I get 50 people if I just call a meeting in 2 days, okay? So, and I also understand the difference of how to get different people. So what happens depending on what I can easily skew these things, meetings and numbers, because certain types of people come out to certain types of meeting, okay?
Absolutely.
And so when you want to get the other people who are not being registered, you have to do a different kind of meeting,
Absolutely.
okay? So who you got are the active people who were leaning forward, who was watching what was going on.
Sure.
Who you did not get, and it could be the other 100 people or 200 people, are the people who are not like that, okay? Every time I have a meeting, I have 200 people come to my ward meeting, and then I'll have another 200 people call me and say, I didn't know about it. You didn't. I have people come to the meetings with the notices. You didn't mail me one. You mailed somebody. Well, how'd you get it? My neighbor gave it to me. So I'm just saying there is a other group, right? And I know. I've known Jessica for 30-something years, I guess. So, so I know, I'm not saying you didn't do the best job you can. I'm just saying I don't like this small sampling, okay? I don't think it's representative, and it's not because of your lack of trying. It is because that we just got all the people who pretty much will think the same way. They come to all the ward meetings. They are the people who are leaning forward. But when I'm trying to do something, I actually have to actively go out and get the people who are not engaged, but who might be the people who really care and have some good ideas. So my question was, there any other way that we could get a sampling? I mean, I can call a meeting and get you 200 people, and it might be the same, but I'm saying we need a larger sampling to me. And is there something else we could do?
More of reliability than, because the likelihood is, I could be totally wrong. Likelihood is your numbers will come out real close. All you're saying is I want the sample size larger so someone would not necessarily question what we got.
If I was on the federal level and I saw these numbers, I would send it right back.
Yeah, I
Okay.
understand that.
All right.
And you know, we can attempt to address that. I just need to make sure that you're aware that the likelihood is.
And if that happens, that's fine. I'm not trying to skew you. I'm just saying that's us.
Okay.
For a city our
Yeah,
size.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Would agree. Thank you.
Okay. And let's see here, what else did I have? Now, Mr. Wessels, you talked again about, besides the public meetings, we had, you said 8 to 10 meetings with the Chodos, neighborhood leaders, and other people?
Yes, those are the 5 geographic focus groups that were done in early May.
Okay, and how do we get neighborhood leaders?
Well, I looked, Jessica can answer, she's the one, her group selected the folks, but what I saw the list, and a lot of them were from the Cubdos. Jessica? How'd you get the...
My entire team helped with that piece of it. The most important thing is we use the Community Builders Network. Got a full list of about 150 people total, and then we proceeded to invite them. We also went back and looked at organizations that may not currently be receiving those HUD funds, but received them over the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years, invited those, and if I look at the list, I think probably about, I want to say 10 to 12% of the people that were part of the focus groups were actually individuals who are currently not receiving funding. So long and short, that's how we got them. Our group sizes ranged, the total was 12. We wanted to keep the focus group size to 12, and I think we had between 7 and 12 at every focus group. And they were all organizations. Redundancy, I'm going to say there were a couple of times when we had 2 representatives from the same organization, but mostly they were individuals from unique organizations. Okay.
Okay. And that, again, also, I would say, that also to me is, we're getting into redundancy, just what I was going to say. When you have the Chodos, the neighborhood leaders, they always tend to be a lot of the same people. She said she only had a few people show up the same, but they're the same groups of people. So we're hearing the same thing over to me, and we have not reached out to a broader group of people. And so while we're patting ourselves on the back and saying that's really a good job, what I'm going to hear when this gets out and we start working on it is that I was not included. How did you do that? Who said that that was a leader? She's not my leader. So as I go back to report this, I'm uncomfortable with how that was put together. And I think that's my best way of saying that.
Well, it's great. I'm going to make sure that you're notified of the 3 public meetings that we're going to be holding, and I hope you can send a bunch of people to them, because we'd love to hear from them.
What I'll do, and I don't send, because then if I send somebody, that's somebody who's thinking like me often, or so what I usually do is just put out a notice. What I do is drop my ward and say, this is happening. Put it on pink or purple or yellow paper so they can read it. And so if you want to do this, and I send out an email blast to as many people as I can, because I will tend to send people who think a lot like me, and that's what I'm saying. I really want to try to hear people who may have something different to say than me. That's all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just so I understand, are you going to be satisfied if the director provides you advance notice for the three meetings? 3 public hearings that he's having?
If he does, then I will email them out to other people and even drop in some areas,
Okay.
just to
I
try to
think all
get-
of us
right.
have a challenge to figure out how to communicate with somebody who
Right.
doesn't think like we do, and so.
I work at it, though.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that you're going to be satisfied with their efforts on that, then.
But I really do want us to have more than 108 people. That's the other thing, okay?
I was kind of surprised or a little bit disappointed. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to just kind of weigh in on that a little bit. You know, we have an organized group of people who are just our everyday neighborhood folks, and that's the Federation of Block Units.
That's right, that's exactly.
I think they would be a great group to connect with. They're having their annual June 28th at the O'Fallon Rec Center, and they represent the city broadly.
Exactly.
And that's a good group to connect with, to get information out, and to also get participation.
And we have a former member who is the head of Urban League who we could reach out to.
Oh, that's true. Yes, yes.
And that would be Mr.
Thank you.
McMillan.
Yes, sir.
But I just want to make sure everybody, I want to dispel any sense that there's some sort of exclusivity or targeting of this input, because I can't imagine that that's the intent of anyone involved in this, and anything that we can do.
That's what I said.
Yeah,
No.
I didn't take it that way. I
Okay.
just want to go ahead
Right.
and I want to make sure that we kind
Right.
of.
No, I
do the
get
best we
accused
can.
of that when I have meetings. You have, because you
Oh,
tend to have the same.
I have
people.
the same problem myself. I think we all have experienced that, and that's why I think it's very important that we be as open with the process as possible. Alderwoman, are you a member? Are you a member of the committee, or no? Okay, that's fine. I was going to say, if you are, you're not on my list here. But if you had a question, go right ahead. Because we are done with the committee members, and we're going to go start. Is it germane to this? Otherwise, I was going to go through the seniority list. Is it germane to the thing that we just? Okay. We completed the committee members, and so now we typically go by seniority, and you'll have to forgive me or help me, because I am not sure if it's Craig or, okay, Craig is
Craig.
next. Okay, Craig, thank you. Sure, please.
First of all, I've appreciated the opportunity to weigh in on some of these and for other people to have that opportunity as well. My recollection is that in the past, the consolidated plan has been something where people's eyes have glazed over. So this is the first great opportunity to do that, and obviously there's always an opportunity to do better with that. I remember that some of the empirical, like political science, social science, and so forth, look at sample size and look at reliability and all those kind of things, and so you might take a look at that as well. One thing that I noticed was that I think we got something like 20% of the people had 2 or more children at home. Is that the case? And so for an area like mine, for instance, obviously there are a number of people who have 2 or more children, and so their concerns have not been reflected, but obviously it's difficult to get to that. So this is a great opportunity. One reflection that I would have was specifically in the area of looking at demolition. I think a lot of times what we do is that sort of would be like total removal of your limbs because you have a wound in those limbs, if I analogize it to healthcare. And so I think what I tend to hear is that people want us to do something about the buildings that are falling down or the buildings that are having issues, but I think many people, or at least I still hope that many people, like to see that we have an urban fabric and one that's architecturally and historically significant. So we really haven't reflected that in terms of the questions that we've asked. You know, it's interesting, sometimes we ask people about affordable housing, and so there's certain buzzwords, things about crime and so forth. So let me take one example. I think everyone would like to be able to afford housing, and we like to be able to see people with a roof over their heads, a job, and food on the table. And yet when we talk about Section 8 housing, that starts a whole series of discussions about that, even though it's just one way of providing that housing. The other thing is to when you were talking about the 3 different sort of opportunity areas and so forth, it seems to me that what we're saying is we want everyone, or at least this is what I hope we're saying. So what I'm hearing being said is that we want every one of the areas of our city to be healthy. And each of us recognize that there's different strengths and different problems and challenges in each one of these areas, much like in our healthcare. So that in some instances, we're going to have to be much more invasive. There may have to be invasive open heart surgery or whatever in particular areas. In another area, it might simply be preventive health care, diet and exercise and that sort of thing. In another area, it might be sort of less invasive surgery, or there might be medications that might be necessary. What we're not saying is that the strategic plan that talks about one particular tool in one area means that we're not going to provide whatever is necessary as a city to try to make sure that each of our areas gets to that healthy situation at the end of the day. At least that's what I'm hoping, because I certainly wouldn't want to participate in something where we're excluding the southeastern part of the city that I represent.
Yeah, I think you've got it right on target.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask you, make sure about this, so Alderman. Now, you talked about, when you were referring to demolition?
Yes.
Demolition of buildings. We do not use block grant money for demolition.
Right, I understand that, and yet one of the questions there talked about demolition. And it did not talk about, within that same question, putting buildings in a position so that we could prevent them from going through demolition, for instance.
I should say we have not in the past used block grant money for demolition. One reason is it's so cumbersome process.
Right. Thank you.
That we read in the discussion piece regarding demolition, because it came up as key padding, but what people, at least in the smaller groups that I work with, all of them stated they wanted, for lack of a better way of saying it, a rating system.
Right.
Where you would basically look at, okay, this building, there's nothing else we can do with it, it needs to be demolished.
That would help, absolutely.
You know, grade 2 is, let's get it ready, let's protect it for future banking, whatever.
Right.
And 3 is, this one is ready, it needs some kind of home repair, what have you. And because we had the 4 public meetings, and in each one of them we had probably 4 to 5 small group sessions, as you recall. So I talked to probably 20 to 30 people in a small group, and I know that I heard that at least 3 times where they weren't really speaking specifically of demolition, but okay, let's try to have a sense to how we demolish and repair.
Because we don't have that particular strategy in place, what happens is we either go too far in one extreme with demolition, or we are stuck with sort of saying, hold on, because we don't know if that strategy is being developed, and so that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Alderman. Each of the aldermen who are not on the committee, real tribute to your dedication to be here for a couple hours into this. But now it's a turn for the protagonist who started this all by sending me an email a few weeks back, Alderwoman Flowers.
Okay, I'll take it. Thank you. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the committee and listening to just my concerns, which, I'm trying to follow this process since HUD came in July and notified us of the changes, and suffering a loss to a couple in my ward, which I thought was very rich to our neighborhood and helped our constituents. But I did participate. I wanted to participate in one of the Southside meetings. I didn't get to do that. As Alderman Schmidt said, some of us have kids, and I had a 1-year-old that just did not want to cooperate that night. But I've been trying to really pay attention, understand. When I had James Hurd ride my ward and try to explain to me how this was going to happen and how the opportunities for our wards would then be dealt with in the future. And I have been reporting this back to my constituents ever since the changes were made so that they will understand. And as the Alderwoman said, you can let somebody know about a meeting, but the next time they see you, they're going to say, I didn't know about it. I don't know how I found out about it. But I did kind of pay attention. I did see a tweet you put out on the 14th, which, welcome to Twitter. You've been on it for a while, but I did see that, just happened chance for following you. I saw that it was put on the website on May the 16th. I think we received a flyer here at the Board of Aldermen. In the meantime, I see something was posted under SLACO on May the 9th. I'm assuming that was the organizations you were dealing with to notify them for their input. I got an email from Jessica Perkins on May 20th, which was the day of the Northside Rec Center meeting. I got a reminder on May 23rd. So really, honestly, the first notification I received was on the 14th, and it was really hard for me to turn it around to my constituents in 6 days. I would like to do a flyer, a mailing, but if we could have it at least maybe 4 weeks prior, so that when you go to the police meeting and you go to the Corker meeting and you go to this meeting, you did distribute it, because I wanted my people to flood the room and it be standing room only, because I've been informing them and they want to participate. The HUD money, the block grant money is circled around our constituents. We get the dollar amount depending on our residents and the need. And so I just think that even though it was a good sample group, even though you got who you did, and I did participate in those focus groups, and as an alderperson, I could hear people and their complaints, I could hear their concerns, but then there were some people that really didn't know exactly how the city system works and ordinances, and were just pleading with some help in their community, and a lot of it was dealing with policing issues and safety issues. So though you may have got a great sampling, and I commend those that came out, we represent hundreds of thousands of people, and we need to get that word out. And if they don't come to get it, then shame on them. But we as leaders have to get that out there. So I'm glad you got the sampling, but, and I don't have any concerns with it, it's just that in the future, you know, we kind of went through this with the NOFA money. If we just had a little bit better notice so that we can get on board. You know, next door is also something that I've seen some of the elected officials use to get out information. That seems to be a good system to post something on. But I just would like to have known a little bit sooner than later. The NOFA money, the way you're vetting that, I know you're going to make the announcement on the 20th, but like for instance, one of the applicants asked me for a letter of support because she wanted to buy one of the houses and turn it into a rooming house. And I know that that's probably one of your targeted area, transitional housing, trying to solve some of the homeless issues. But when these people get these properties, and this is their proposal, I don't know if they give it to you, and you know you have to go through a community process to open up a transitional house or a rooming house. Is that something that's told to those applicants, or is that something that you vet before you award it to those applicants?
I guarantee you that would not fly. Well, first of all, it wasn't a proposal, and second of all, it wouldn't fly if it was a proposal. Third, part of the process is to identify exactly what, you know, how many units. Generally, what we're talking about here is rehabbing existing units, although there's some new housing as well. But you know, they're required to tell us the number of units, the cost per square foot. I mean, it's a very detailed proposal that's required.
Okay, because this was for a single family.
Including a pro forma, you know, including plans. I mean, this is what we want to do is eliminate what's happened in the past is somebody says, I got a developer, and he or she's going to do 4 units at X address. And it just, you know, nothing happens, sometimes for years. And both the money and the property is held in abeyance. Well, with these proposals, 12 months from now, I think we're going to have housing for someone. These are not long-term commitments, and if they don't produce, the money will be reprogrammed. But I would say the quality of the developers that we have, I'm confident that they're going to be moving quickly.
I'm sure there should be plenty of NOFA money for the second ward, because we tried to you know, being number 1 in predatory lending, number 3 in foreclosures, we tried to rehab homes, and we just had a lot of red tape and stumbling blocks from CDA, so I hope it works out better for somebody else. And
Well, we're
it
going to
does
have
provide-
another one in November, another NOFA in November for about $2 million or so. So, and we expect some of the folks that are not going to get funded this time, it's a good chance they'll get funded next time, because there are some relatively good proposals that are not funded.
And as Alderman Schmidt, I don't think he mentioned this, but he suggested as the presentation was, you probably should have notified those that didn't get funding, because they probably would have been there standing pretty tall with a couple of folks with them as well. When I did go to the meeting, one of the selections that came up was bike lanes. So that's why I asked the alderman to hold the meeting, because I was concerned that if in another community you had more participants that thought bike lanes were more important, and they didn't have the housing issues or the retail issues that maybe another ward would have, that would be a higher consideration than other things that are more needed in a community. And just so you know, retail development is very important in the 2nd Ward, and that's where I'm concerned, as the alderman from 24th asked, about the development areas, and then there's an annual plan, how you will determine that money will be spent in those areas on those streets. So I'm waiting for that, because
I
when
don't think that, I don't think that's, the annual action plan is not going to it's not going to be in that, how the money is going to be spent on streets, on particular streets.
No, retail development.
Well, I don't.
When I wrote with Mr. Hurd, one of the things he said is that, you know, regardless if you were a CUBDO that was funded or not, developers would be able to put in bids for projects in wards, and you possibly consider them to fund. And so, if there are buildings in downtown Dayton that a developer is interested in, that developer would be able to then put in an application proposal whatsoever, and you would consider it for funding. Otherwise, I don't know how this is going to help us in our retail development.
It's not going to help you in your retail development. I don't think. I think.
Category.
I think what we're concentrating on is housing production.
Okay.
So, and that's what the priority was in the spring NOFA. That's what the priority will be in the fall NOFA. I think the SLDC really is the folks that get into the commercial end of development.
But that was one of the options that we chose today, as well as some of the people in those public meetings. Retail development came up, economic development
It came up. There's a lot of things that come up which we can or cannot get into. We're not, generally speaking, as I said, the NOFAs are I'll give you an example of one we are funding. And we can if someone has there's $500,000 going to St. Louis Commercial Credit Union to put a bank at the site of the old Gateway Bank. Okay. That was made and approved by the board in the 2014 action plan, so it was approved last. So that was a specific set aside. That kind of thing can happen, but it's, we're probably talking about maybe 1 or 2 of those a year.
So when we get our goals and objectives in, I guess you said August. Yeah. Even though there were people that attended those meetings that were, looking and counting on the economic development and retail part of it as being on the agenda, that's really not something that'll probably end up in the goals and objectives.
It is, but it's very limited. It's not part of the NOFA. It's not part
I know
of
that. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to confuse the NOFA. It just was something that came up that I just made a note of. But I'm talking about the consolidated plan itself. So
Consolidated plan won't have anything that specific in it. The annual action plan, the board bill that you get, which is the annual action plan, that'll have the type of, it'll be a business development component, but it'll be very small.
I guess I'm just concerned about how my community will be serviced other than home improvement loans, which is now citywide based. So I'm just concerned and interested how this block grant funding will impact the second ward, if at all. That's all I'm just trying to figure out. Thank you.
Well, I think it will. I think it will impact, it will be, there's social services and public services that all the people in your community use on a daily basis, and some of those are going to be funded this year just as they were funded last year.
But those social services have to be provided by a qualified CUBDO, approved CUBDO, or whatever it would be. And at this moment, there are none in the second ward.
No.
The closest one that we were under the understanding would have been Senior Home Services.
It doesn't have to be, does not have to be, go through a CUBDO. We fund Big Brother, Big Sister. We fund all sorts of organizations that your folks and my folks would benefit from.
Okay, well, Big Brothers, Big Sisters is not really in the second ward.
I'm not talking about the location. I'm talking about the residents
Right,
of the
residents.
second ward.
There's very few.
Mr. Chairman, could I give some assistance very quickly to the Alderwoman of the second ward? Block grant funds unfortunately have never been able to assist us with those types of needs. And St. Louis Development Corporation is really where we need to also have a relationship that's stronger and also work with planning with them. And hopefully we can get something organized in the very near future so that we can show how to get those kinds of services that you talked about. It can be done. Yeah.
That person or that organization says they cannot help me, then that just means it's more momentum toward the service the department that's supposed to. So I'm just going to ask those questions and just give whatever I can out to whoever's given. And if it's not coming from that organization to my community, then I need to find me another.
I totally agree. And so hopefully we can, match up some of the things that are out here available so we can get the appropriate assistance to you. And I also wanted to add another contact and suggestion for getting information out. You probably did this. You used our clergy coalitions, the various entities to get information out. And one of the new recent things that we're proposing to do to get information out, our churches in my community, we'll start posting meeting information on our neon strip signs at our churches. Everybody drives past and they see them. And so even if you don't attend church to look at the church bulletin, the information is there for the public. And so that's another way that we're going to get information out.
Thank you, Alderwoman. You're going to have to help me again. Sinardi is, Joe, you're next. Is that, no, Alderman Vaccaro? You guys are both very patient for waiting so long to take your turn.
My question, and I don't even know who to address it to, but comes down to the food pantries. There's one food pantry servicing South St. Louis, 3 wards, 23, 24, and 10. It's in the 24th ward. It got very limited to no funding this year and stands a huge chance of going out of business. I know that one of the categories was food. What do you plan to do to address that in this 5-year plan?
You're right. Food pantry was not part of the discussion. The food access was. Food access did not rate, exceptionally high over the from the participants. But what I would say is we welcome your thought, your input. I think it's a good point, and we will consider it and discuss it and see what we can do with that input.
I would
Okay.
appreciate it. That was my
Thank
only
you.
question.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderwoman, you've been very patient. Your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for spending some time with us today, all of you. I guess I'd echo the concerns shared by the alderwomen from the first our ward. We had less than 1% of our population turn out for these meetings. I received my initial notification from a tweet that someone else sent out less than a week before the first meeting, and did not get a notification from the city, I think, until the day of the meetings or the day before. And I think on the heels of HUD asking us to look at doing things a little bit differently, we really missed an opportunity to truly engage the public. There are many cities models who are doing community engagement in a different way that's much more successful. I think we could have looked at those. And I'm just curious how much we paid for the consultants.
The total cost is $149,000. The public engagement is $77,165. As I said, $149,000 is the total cost. The cost 4 years ago was $250,000. The number of public meetings 5 years ago was 2.
And how many people showed up for those?
I think it was about 10.
Okay. Yeah, I just...
I happened to look at the last 5-year plan just yesterday, and I happened to look at the public meetings and public engagement, and that's what it was, about 10 people total for the 2 meetings.
Which is, obviously, we save some money if you position it that way, but I still think this amount of money for that turnout is unacceptable. I don't have any questions.
Again, let me say this. We're not paying $77,000 for public meetings. We had 5 geographic focus group meetings prior to that. We're having 3 theme-based focus group meetings later in June. And that's just in addition to 3 public hearings that are going to be held first one being June. So I hear what you're saying. I would have liked to have seen more at the public meetings, but that's just one component of the public engagement. And the focus groups were extremely important, and the one we're going to have, the theme-based focus group we'll have later in June, is important as well.
Okay, can you make sure that I get information on when those are going to be held? And I guess I'm a little bit confused about the public meetings that have already been held, and then what's the difference between what's happening in June and what happened in May with respect to public input?
The public meetings, there were 4 public meetings in May. There were 5 geographic focus group meetings in May. The 3 theme-based focus groups will be held later in June, I think the 23rd, but what's your question?
My question is, what is the ability for the public to have?
There is these are not public meetings.
Okay.
The theme-based focus groups will be individuals that have some specific expertise or understanding of the particular issues that are going to be discussed at those meetings, and the issues are coming from the public meetings. Each of these meetings built on one the other. First, we had the focus group, and the issues that came out of those were utilized as a starting point for the 4 public meetings. The issues that came out of those meetings will now be used for the theme-based focus groups.
Okay, thanks.
I think everyone's had a chance to ask questions. Go ahead, Alderwoman, ask the question.
We had 4 public meetings in May, and what was the other things we had in May?
5 geographic focus groups.
Thanks, everyone, for their patience and time today. We appreciate it. Mr. Director, thank you for coming over and apprising us from a standpoint of communicating with us you're going to have a timeline that's, did I hear you say earlier that
Yes.
will kind of outline?
It'll be in your boxes today. We've got it here.
And forgive me for not having taken better notes when you're going through that, but we will be expecting to hear and produce a board bill in October. Is timeframe, is that when the ball's actually in our court again?
Yes. It'll be, I would think the board bill would probably be introduced in late September.
Okay.
Generally, hearings are in October, and a board bill passed late October, 1st of November, and we, get it signed to HUD for their approval by early to mid-November.
Yeah, and I just, the reason I guess I was
That's
trying
their
to,
schedule.
Yeah.
Okay.
The reason I guess I was trying to make some introductory comments is the director and I sat down mostly on my behalf because I was curious about the process since this is my first time through, and I met with the St. Louis Regional HUD office, and they made it pretty clear to me that after they get through this process of engagement and we get a board bill over here, they're not going to be very tolerant of us altering, tweaking, changing, or anything else. And so at least that's the impression that I left with. Now, I don't know how much say they have over, I mean, I don't know what level of brinksmanship we want to do, but
right.
I don't know what our leverage is in that, but that was the very clear message that I left with from that meeting, was that they feel like if we go through this engagement process, that when we're done with it, that the Board of Aldermen, they're not going to be real patient with us. So would you
Thank you for your comments.
Huh?
I said, thank you for your comments.
Well,
yeah, that's, I mean, yes, they've been clear about that.
Okay. So from our standpoint, if we want to have input so that we're not perceived by HUD as overly intrusive in the process, but at the same time, if we feel something is important to be included, how best should we engage you and the other consultants between now and then to kind of
I would say send us comments in writing.
Okay.
And
please, everyone, if you feel that way, document it so that, if you feel you're not going to be heard. I think that's it. One last thing, Stephen, if you don't mind, you had said that this was, if we set priorities up here, this really shouldn't be the overarching priorities of the city, that we should have, our strategic plan for the city somewhere else. I've been asking SLDC for that. Are you aware, is there anything out there that you are plugging your plan into?
There's Don might help with this some, but there's nothing in terms of what I was thinking of there. There's there's a strategic land use plan that the city has. But it can be difficult to sort of go one place and see what the city's priorities are in terms of, I'd use the example of, the city has a capital improvements plan, but that doesn't really get at sort of, you wouldn't be able to, from looking at that, to see that there is a strategy for this corridor, or, you really, there's no, it's very hard to get at those things.
All right. Well, I'm just wanting to make sure that I'm not missing something. If you're having trouble finding it, then
Mr. Chairman, that's one of those things that we could push for and start that process, because if we don't, it may never get where it needs to be.
Well, as I've been trying to review some of the economic development stuff, and we have been getting, I want to say that I have been getting a great deal of cooperation from Otis and his staff over there, but it's becoming apparent to me that we really need to have a more thoughtful and kind of something in writing that we can all talk about and articulate and kind of develop a collective and view of where we want to go. And I just don't think that that document currently exists.
The document does not exist, and if we continue to wait, see, right now, we're at the turning point for the city. We have too much land available. We have too much opportunity that we need to address on the economic level. You know, everybody gets stuck on housing, but the economic part of it, if it's not addressed, it can't support the survival of the city.
I can't agree with you more. I mean, I've given this, I've been, I think, reasonably successful with in my ward of creating sources of, creating pockets of resources or buckets of resources to create, neighborhoods that are emerging. But I don't know if we have a model, an economic model that will make the entire city sustainable,
Actually,
going forward.
We do. Stephen Akery's group did one of the most comprehensive plans that the city has had. That North Sarah, that central development plan that was done, was one of the most comprehensive ones that had a solid economic component to it. And they've been following the plan, and I think that it's really one of the best that we've done in the city. So we got somewhere to start.
Yeah, I'd love to take a look at that, and I noticed there was some emails flying back and forth about the Team 4 plan, which I have read about for years, but have never seen a copy of. If you have it in PDF format or something.
I don't have it in e-format.
Okay.
It was given to me, but all the things that's happened, they talked about it in the plan.
Yeah.
All right, well, why don't we...
Mr. Chairman, let me reemphasize just one point. The RFP, I mentioned this earlier, we're putting it in all the aldermen's mailboxes today, but a draft of the RFP will be in your mailboxes. Please, if you've got any thoughts on what should be in it that isn't, let us know by the 25th of, you can email me, you can email Alana Green. There's also another email address on your information. But by the 25th of June, because the RFP will be issued July 1, that RFP, there will be awards made on that by August, will be reviewed in August. By September 1st, and that'll be a big part of the board bill, the action plan and the board bill that we argue about every year, okay? Mm-hmm. So it's important now, if you've got some thoughts, to put them in writing and give them to us, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, was there any other comments, or we'll take it that today's meeting's adjourned, and thank you all for your